What's going on, everyone? This is the Noah Gillian Show, and I, of course, am your host, Noah Gillian. So happy you decided to join in today. It is the 26th of September, 2023, and on today's episode, we're going to be going over the Eagles' dominant Monday night win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday Night Football last night, and then also go around the rest of the NFL and talk about some key storylines that came from the weekend. Before we get into that, though, please hit that subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please give us that 5-star review. It's a great way to help our podcast grow, and it takes only a couple seconds. So if you're listening now, it would really be appreciative if you would do that. Also, you can find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram. All our handles will be in the description below. If you're watching us on YouTube, the show's accounts are right here. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So on Monday night, September 25th, the Eagles go down to Tampa Bay to play a football game. And it was a battle of two undefeated teams. One which was pretty penciled in by most, and one that was a surprise to a lot in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's not forget this is a team that won the Super Bowl only a couple years ago, obviously with Tom Brady under center, not Baker Mayfield. But a lot of the players are still there. Offensively, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on the outside. Their offensive line still has a number of veterans, along with their defense. Vita Vea, Devin White, Shaquille Barrett, Antoine Winfield. A lot of these guys, Jamel Dean, a lot of these guys were on that team. And you kind of see, you saw last night, there was a little resolve early on specifically. And then, it kind of spiraled out of control for the Buccaneers. But as we dive into more of a detailed breakdown, the final score was 25-11. And it was, honestly, you look at that score, it was not that close. The Eagles pretty much dominated this game from start to finish. Tampa Bay was threatening early, late in the first quarter, especially also in the second quarter as well. Early, there was a number of plays by them a number of drives that they got down into the red zone. But overall, this was just an absolute dominant defensive performance from the Eagles. It was one of those performances. And I was with, the people we were with last night, we were talking, and it was just like, it's almost like just such a low stress, boring game. And, I saw a number of people talking on social media after the game. It's like the Eagles have made winning boring, and it really just comes down to how they play as opposed to what the final score is. And I think that's such an important distinction because the great teams, the final score doesn't matter. Like, it does because you need the wins, and that's all that matters is getting that win. But at the same time, the only way to sustain that success and sustain an excellent level of play is to not worry about the results and instead focus on your process. And that's what it seems like they do. They're extremely, extremely detailed in what they do, specifically offensively, defensively, each side of the ball. Just absolutely had their turns. And it just shows you how good this team can be. Especially being 3-0 and not even really playing a complete game yet. Pieces of their games have shined over the 3 weeks, but never in concert with each other. And I think that's good, at least now in the early part of the schedule. This is the Eagles' kind of light part of the schedule as we get into October and November, where it's going to start to get really, really interesting with these games. So as we kind of break it down into more of a micro level, Jalen Hurts, let's talk about quarterback one. Let's talk about his game there. Definitely not one of Jalen Hurts' best games at all. Number of throws were inaccurate, leading guys the wrong way, multiple turnovers for Hurts in this one, 2 interceptions, and it just kind of seemed like the pressure was getting to him a little bit. Their defensive line was able to kind of get after Jalen Hurts a little bit. They only sacked Jalen one time, but there was multiple hurries. They hit Jalen Hurts a number of times. You could tell that even when the pressure wasn't there and he had a little pocket to step up in, a couple times he kind of got a little nervous and broke the pocket and tried to scramble. And it came down to efficiency for him. I mean, 23 of 37, definitely not what you want to see. Did throw for 277 through the air, threw a touchdown through the air as well on a beautiful, I mean, for how poor he played, and he didn't play poor at all, but just, using that, for how poor he played, he stepped in, or he stayed in that pocket and made one of the better throws I've seen him make in his career. To Olamide Zaccheaus. Sorry. Olamide Zaccheaus. He made one of the best throws I've seen from Jalen Hurts in his career. I mean, he stayed in the pocket for 5-6 seconds straight, and in the NFL is an absolute eternity. He had a play earlier in the game where if he stayed in the pocket, he had Dallas Goedert wide open over the middle of the field and instead broke the pocket. On this play, he absolutely hung in there and made a play, and it was just an absolute dot. He took a shot from one of their defensive linemen, absolutely came and crushed him, but he delivered just an absolute beauty of a ball, an absolute beauty. So it was an up and down night. Obviously, had some big turnovers. One of his interceptions got picked at the 2-yard line on just an absolutely phenomenal play where Devontae Smith, it looked like he kind of thought he was behind the defense, and the safety just jumped over him pretty much and just glided right past him, snuck the interception, and tapped his feet in. The Eagles, on the next play, tackle him in the end zone for a safety. So it turned out to be a positive play for the Eagles, although you never like to see the interceptions from Jalen. But honestly, I don't care if he's given his best players a chance to go up and get the ball. It's one of my favorite things about Jalen Hurts is his willingness to trust his star receivers. You saw a number of times last year with A.J. Brown, even this year with A.J. Brown as well, and especially with Devontae Smith this year. Deep balls, going up and getting contested catches. So I don't hate that. And where in the area of the field it is, even if it's an interception, they're pinned back, or it kind of worked as a pseudo punt. So obviously we don't love to see the turnovers, but that one ended up being a positive for the Eagles. Fact, since Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni are the head coach quarterback in their last 25 regular season starts, they are 23-2. They have won 23 of their last 25 regular season games. They have also had a 10-plus point lead in 20 of those 25 games. So you're talking about a team that gets out early, builds on leads, and is able to hold those leads. That's courtesy of Elliott Shore Parks on Twitter there. So I want to make sure I credit him with that stat. But, I mean, you're talking about an elite win percentage. 23-2 is absolutely ridiculous. This spans over the course of 3 seasons. So it's not like a 1-year fluke. This was 21, this was 22, and now in 23, it's just continued to be the case. They seem to just have an amazing chemistry. Nick Sirianni seems to be the perfect guy for this locker room. Seems like he just galvanizes everybody. And then just Jalen Hurts and his demeanor just seems to be like the perfect leader. You see even guys on other teams, which is probably one of my favorite things. Like, you see guys on other teams like talking about Jalen Hurts, whether they're former college teammates or just division rivals or people that see him. They just talk about his leadership ability from afar and just how it seems like the guys just totally buy in and believe in him and just will go to war with him. And I think that's so important. And there's quarterbacks around the league that you could tell the locker room is either divided or, maybe that guy's, not doing everything he can to be the best he can at the quarterback position. And, everyone always says, especially like coaches and stuff, you can't fool the guys in the locker room. Like, people will know right away whether people can play, whether they can't play, whether they prepare the right way, whether they don't prepare the right way. And Jalen Hurts, I mean, I can't say enough positive things about him, whether it's off the field or anything like that. Just an absolute joy to have as a Philadelphia Eagle. Even in a bad game last year, never put his head down, never allowed a turnover to take him out of the game mentally. It was always next play, right to the bench on the iPad, figuring out where we can be better. The communication that he has with the players on the offense is phenomenal. Even after misses on plays, they're talking right afterwards, like, no, you sit here, don't come over, and really working through that now. And, I mentioned, we were talking last night, it's like, I love that they're not even playing well and there's a lot to critique, but they're still getting wins. It makes it, I talked about this last week, it makes it so much easier to critique and to teach when it's coming in a victory as opposed to a loss, when people might have their feelings hurt or might start pointing fingers because we lost because of player X or whatever. Whereas now they're winning, so it's like, you need to be accountable for your own actions and improve, because as Hurt says, the standard is the standard, and until they reach that standard, it's always going to be a continuous battle for it. So, I'm so excited. That stat absolutely blew me away about the wins and losses in their last 25 regular season games, which is not nothing. That's not a small sample size. I know it seems like an arbitrary number, but you're talking about spans of 3 different seasons, and it's been absolutely phenomenal. And that's not even including playoffs where they're 2-2 with, a couple big wins and obviously the Super Bowl loss. So absolutely good game from Jalen. Not great, not bad, just a good game from Jalen. He did everything he needed to do for this game, and he made enough plays to win. Another major storyline from this game is DeAndre Swift. I mean, this guy is absolutely dynamic. Is just one of, it's the offensive line. It's his patience, ability to hit the hole where he's got to go, his contact balance when he's going through the hole, shaking tackles. We were talking last night again. It just seems like it seems like he falls forward every single run. Like he never gets hit and stonewalled in the back, and he probably does, but just like when you're watching, it almost seems like he gets hit and he kind of lays forward for that extra yard, and kind of that trait that all the best running backs seem to have. And last night, 16 carries for 130 yards. You're talking about 1 week after going 175 yards. So now DeAndre Swift is the number 2 rushing leader in terms of rushing yards through 3 weeks. And let's not forget, this guy had 1 touch in week 1. And he is currently the number 2 rusher in the NFL. Just has been an absolute stud. There's really not much else to say here. He seems like the perfect complement for this offensive line. This offensive line, first of all, too, has just been an absolute wrecking ball. I mean, the whole, that thing when people say, "Oh, how many yards do you think the average person could get in an NFL game on a carry?" And you're not getting a yard, and that's just like with NFL players. Like, the average person cannot get a yard. Through some of the holes that the Eagles' offensive line was creating last night, I think I could get a few yards. I think I could. I mean, these holes were they were like as wide as the hash marks. And I could get through there. I could get 5 yards. Yeah. On that play, yeah, that's how good the offensive line was last night. Even Landon Dickerson left with an injury, but it seemed like he was fine. He was standing on the sideline toward the second half, or the end of the second half. So it seemed like they were just kind of being precautious with him. They said it was a knee contusion, so nothing structural, nothing tissue related. So it seems good. He probably will be in there next week against the Commanders. But just DeAndre Swift, I mean, this is Howie Roseman in a nutshell. Flips draft picks to the Lions, ends up acquiring DeAndre Swift on a $1.7 million contract for 1 year. Like, if he keeps rushing like this and stays healthy, that's the thing with DeAndre. He always seems to pick up nicks and bruises. He had shoulder issues last year. Could be hamstring. Like, he's always dealt with something. If he can keep this up, he's going to get a nice contract in the offseason. Probably like a Miles Sanders-like contract. Probably not going to be from the Eagles, but, maybe. I don't know. He seems like a perfect fit. He's young. He's from Philly. He seems like he's meshing phenomenally with the locker room. It seems like after the last 2 games, the the excitement from the offensive line has just grown. Well, and Nick Sirianni, they're talking about, yeah, he had a great game. It was really good to get him carries. And then after this game, they're like, well, you didn't know how good this guy actually was. I mean, he is an absolute menace. And it's just been phenomenal that the Eagles were able to acquire him. Howie Roseman on draft day made this move, and it just seems to be working out swimmingly for the Eagles. Also, offensively, as we kind of wrap up our talk before we get to the defense, A.J. Brown, I mean, this is him in a nutshell. 9 catches, 131 yards, looked great. It was a quieter Devontae Smith game, 4 catches for 28 yards, but in a game like this, when we're running the ball so well, it really comes down to probably one of them is going to have a more explosive game than the other. And after the squeaky wheel of him kind of blowing up on the sideline a little last week, I know he shot it down and everyone shot it down on the Eagles that it wasn't really anything, but at the same time, the squeaky wheel usually gets the oil. So he ended up getting 9 catches, 131 yards. Devontae, was still active, had a couple screen plays for some first downs. I know the first down late in the fourth quarter was able to kind of get that win. Dallas Goedert, 5 catches for 41 yards. He was involved as well, getting some key catches to move the chains. And then Olamide Zaccheaus, got that 58 yards on the 2 catches and the touchdowns late. So usually he's not going to be an every week contributor. So that's where you can maybe see Devontae picking up some more of that production. But he showed, he was productive when they called on him. He did everything he was needed, had a couple catches along with the 34-yard touchdown. And then he had obviously the other one, which was a 20-plus yard catch. So great output from the pass catchers. It was great to see AJ finally kind of break out of this mini slump, if you will. I wouldn't even call it that, but it looked really, really good. Now, let's talk about the defense, because this was one of the better defensive performances I've seen out of the Eagles in some time. Like I mentioned, it just was a boring game to watch, and the Eagles were dominating. Like, they were absolutely dominating, and it was a game that was just kind of boring for the average fan to watch. But when you really watched how the Eagles defense was going, it was a sight to behold. And let's start at the defensive line, because another Howie Roseman getting Jalen Carter in the draft. I mean, this is, I said last night again, I think this is probably Howie Roseman's best draft pick in probably the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe even the last 10 years. I mean, he is an absolute wrecking ball. He is an absolute stud. This stat right here, courtesy of Ed Warder on ESPN. In 3 career games, Jalen Carter pressured the quarterback against double team blocks 6 times. So 6 times this year, Jalen Carter has been double teamed, and he still pressured the quarterback. That only trails Micah Parsons, who is arguably the best defensive player in the game. Pass rusher at that. So you're talking about a guy that is absolutely dominant. And then this is a stat, this is a quote from Nicholas Morrow. He was talking after the game about the safety, and he said Sean Desai, the defensive coordinator, told Morrow to blitz. He called Morrow to blitz from the middle linebacker position because he wanted to free Jalen Carter from the double team, because they knew he was going to get doubled. So they said, all right, we're going to send the linebacker to eat that other blocker up so Jalen can go one-on-one. The Bucs just said, whatever, we'll double Jalen Carter, and Nicholas Morrow shot through pretty much unblocked and made the tackle on Rachaad White for the safety. So the fact that this guy is already getting this attention from defensive coordinators is just unbelievable. I mean, he is an absolute beast. Like, he is an absolute monster. He's a freight train. You can't stop him one-on-one. He just hits guys with the shimmy. He hits guys with the club. It's just any kind of move at the defensive tackle position. He has, it seemed, already mastered, or has the physical gifts to pull off whenever he wants. And I feel like he is getting so much of the pub, and rightfully so, because he is an absolute monster. Let me see. Kind of the stats. I thought he ended up with a half a sack. Yeah, he ended up with a half a sack, and he had a tackle as well. It's taken away from Jordan Davis, who has been an absolute beast too. I mean, these two guys are the future of the defensive tackle position for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, credit to Fletcher Cox, because he is in that room every single day with these defensive tackles, and he is showing these guys how to be elite at their position. And it's allowing him to kind of be better, as well as allowing him to see more one-on-one actions. And this is a guy who's a potential Hall of Fame player. Let's not discount what Fletcher Cox is. He is a potential Hall of Famer, and they're letting him just go one-on-one. He obviously doesn't have the same burst he has when, 10 years ago, but at the same time, if you let him go one-on-one, he'll turn it up a few times a game and just absolutely embarrass you. He gets a half a sack in this game. Him and Jalen Carter had half a sack each, and they just absolutely blew up a play because Carter draws two, Fletcher's one-on-one, Fletcher gets in the backfield, Carter sheds both of them, and then they get to the quarterback. It's unbelievable. Jordan Davis has taken the next step. He looked, Jordan Davis, it didn't seem like he was quite in as good a shape last year to be a consistent player. He really struggled in pass rushing situations, was more of a run stuffer. Well, this year, it's just gone to a new level. His run defense has improved, which was the strength of his game. His pass rush moves have improved. He's became a lot quicker. It seems like he's in much better shape. It's like a similar weight, but it looks like he's like more in tune with his body and everything. And it's just been a monster. And when you talk about when the Eagles go to that bare front, and when I say bare front, I mean they have a nose tackle, 2 defensive tackles, and 2 ends. So you're talking about 5 defensive linemen. And you have Jordan Davis, Fletcher Cox, and Jalen Carter. I mean, what is an offense supposed to do? You can only double, realistically, probably 2 people on a given play. And you're not really going to double 2 people on pass plays, only on the run plays. So who are you going to single coverage? More times than not, it's going to end up being Fletcher Cox, and he's just going to absolutely eat. And we're not even talking about a guy in Hassan Reddick who had 16 sacks last year, I think, 17 sacks. He hasn't had a sack this year. He might have 1 sack or a couple tackles for loss. He really has been not super involved, as I don't even know if he had a tackle last night. I'm looking at the box score. I don't even see him with a tackle, Hassan Reddick. But you're talking about a guy who almost won Defensive Player of the Year last year, and he's an afterthought on the Eagles' defensive line. So it's so important, and it's so refreshing, and it's so critical that Howie Roseman understands where his bread is buttered and where they're going to go. It might not be the sexy pick every year to take a defensive tackle, but it's games last night. It's games like on Thursday night. It's games on week 1 where you see that investment pay off. I mean, in the fourth quarter, Mac Jones, they're at the 20-yard line. They're going in, and the defensive line steps up 2 straight plays, 3rd, 4th down, sack, tackle for loss, incomplete pass, turnover. Week 2, I mean, Jalen Carter, unblockable, and they were able to get after Kirk Cousins all night. The run game, there was no run game to speak of for Ramondre Stevenson, a very good back against New England, Alexander Mattison, a good back for the Minnesota Vikings, and Rachaad White, a good back for Tampa Bay. There was no running lanes at all. This defensive line is unbelievable. They had 41 rushing yards, Tampa Bay did, and it was just absolute, like they had nowhere to go. Rachaad White had 14 carries for 38 yards. Like, they had nowhere to go. And this defensive line is just absolutely monstrous. Jalen Carter is an absolute beast. Jordan Davis is taking the next step. Fletcher Cox looks as young as ever. And then they're just rotating guys on that. I didn't even mention Milton Williams. What's his name? Tulipoli. What's this guy's name? He had a sack last night. Marlon Tuipulotu had a sack last night. He's like our 5th string defensive tackle, and he makes plays almost every week. So it was just a dominant game from the defensive line. The linebackers also had a good night. I mentioned Nicholas Morrow had that tackle for loss for the safety. He had a very, very good game. Terrell Edmonds had a good game. He was playing more safety a little bit. Zach Cunningham had another good game at the at the linebacker position. Cunningham and Morrow did well in the absence of Nakobe Dean there. And then the secondary, the secondary probably had the weakest game out of the 3 units, but in saying that, they still had a great game. Mike Evans, he had a good game, 5 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, but Chris Godwin only 3 for 32. Baker Mayfield threw for 146 yards. He also threw an interception. So when I say the worst game out of the 3, it was still very, very good. Reed Blankenship back seems like it's made all the difference. An interception, led the team in tackles again. He's proven to be another gem for Howie Roseman as an undrafted free agent. Josh Jobe also was second on the team in tackles, but this is a stat courtesy of, where is this at? Jeff Kerr, CBS on Twitter. the Buccaneers went after Josh Jobe. Baker Mayfield threw 25 times, I believe. Let me just pull that to make sure I have the exact numbers. Baker Mayfield threw 25 times, and 8 of those throws went at Josh Jobe. And he completed 4 of 8 balls for 27 yards, a 56.3 rating, and it was only 3.4 yards per attempt. And he also had 1 defensive pass interference. So an up and down game for Josh Jobe. Like, they were not going to target Darius Slay. They weren't going after James Bradbury. They were going after Josh Jobe, and he held up. Honestly, I mean, obviously 4 of 8. You don't love to see that. The defensive pass interference, not great. But like 27 yards, a 56 rating, like, and this is your third string quarterback, and they're going after him. And he made some plays last night. Obviously wasn't perfect, but made a lot of plays. Also, shout out Sidney Brown, rookie, first-year player from Illinois safety. There was a play, 8 minutes left in the second quarter. It was only 3-0 at this point, so still very much in the balance. This was one of their better drives of the day for Tampa Bay. They drove all the way down into the red zone, and Baker Mayfield has Mike Evans wide open and kind of puts just like a tiny bit too much air under it. Mike Evans catches the ball falling into the end zone, and Sidney Brown is falling as well, reaches the left arm and smacks it out of his hands. Like, such an instinctive, reactionary play. It just shows you like the depth of the back end of the defense, the coaching points, because Sidney Brown's falling, and usually sometimes they'll just brace your fall, but no, he's reaching with that left hand, looking for that ball, trying to scoop it out, and made a massive play. At that point in the game, it's 3-0. And if he doesn't make that play, it's 7-0. Now the Eagles are down. Tampa Bay can really pin their ears back and maybe come after Hurts a little bit more. But now instead they kick a field goal. It's tied. And, the Eagles are able to go down the field, score a touchdown, blah, 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 get the ball back at halftime and, kind of keep going. So, honestly, I mean, the defense absolutely played phenomenal. That was really the story of the game for me. Reed Blankenship being back in the lineup was a huge difference. James Bradbury started in the slot. If you guys listened last week, I did mention how James Bradbury, we should look for him to be in the slot a lot. We talked about this on last week's episode, and they came out before the game that he was going to start at the nickel corner position. So it was something to keep an eye out on. He looked pretty good. He still played outside a decent amount, but he looked pretty good, and the rest of the defense just followed in suit. So honestly, Sean Desai has been doing a phenomenal job as defensive coordinator for the Eagles. Last week, obviously, it wasn't his best game. Minnesota had a pretty good offensive game. The pass defense was in serious question. The last 2 years, Mac Jones threw for 350 yards. I'm pretty sure Kirk threw for over 325 yards against this Eagles defense, and Baker Mayfield really couldn't do anything, and attribute that to the defensive line, attribute that to the secondary, and attribute that to Sean Desai, because he coached a phenomenal game, pushed all the right buttons, and he's utilizing that talent in the right way. So overall, just a great win for the Eagles. One last stat I did want to mention, and this might be my favorite stat that I saw all morning, kind of doing my research and everything for this. The Eagles got the ball back on the 25-yard line with 9 minutes and 22 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Tampa Bay didn't see the ball. The game ended with Philadelphia holding the ball. The Philadelphia Eagles had a 9-minute and 22-second drive in the fourth quarter. They got the ball after, I think, a touchdown by Mike Evans. They got the ball with 9 minutes and 22 seconds left. I don't know if you guys heard me the first 2 times I said it. 9 minutes and 22 seconds left. They bled the clock all the way down to 0 and got the win. They didn't even score. They didn't score a field goal. They didn't score a touchdown. They bled 9 minutes off of the clock. Like, that is such a key stat. That's probably my biggest stat from the game. I mean, with everything that Jalen Carter did, with everything that Jalen Hurts did, everything that A.J. Brown did, all these guys, Reed Blankenship, all these guys had great statistical games. That is the best stat that we can take away from this game, because what does that show? Why is that so important? What does that show? That shows maturity from Jalen Hurts, understand the situation, shows maturity from Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni, clock management, and it just shows the maturity as an offense as a whole to understand, listen, We have a 14-point lead. The last thing we want to do is go 3 and out, give the ball right back. Let's say they score in 2 minutes. Now we're up 7 with 7 minutes left. If we give the ball back, they have a chance to go down and tie the game up right away. So they drive their way down the field. They benefit from some penalties. They knock themselves back with some penalties. They're able to run the ball. They're able to throw the ball when they need to get conversions. A hats off drive for the Eagles, especially in the fourth quarter. I mean, bleeding the clock pretty much from 10 minutes all the way down to 0 without scoring is just an unbelievable stat. So hats off to the entire Eagles offense for that, because that was absolutely phenomenal and probably one of my favorite, because that's what Patrick Mahomes does. Like, that's what the best quarterbacks in the league do. When you, in the Super Bowl, we scored or something and there was 4 minutes left when we tied the game up. When Jalen Hurts tied the game with the 2-point conversion, there was 4 minutes left, and I'm just like, I don't think we get the ball back. That's what great quarterbacks can instill in other teams. There was 4.5 minutes left in a Super Bowl with your defense, the 2 sacks away from being the most having the most sacks in NFL defensive history, or whatever. Most sacks as a defense in history. That's your defensive line, right? If you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you have a great secondary. You have a player on the back end, CJ Gardner-Johnson, who led the NFL in interceptions, or was top 2 in interceptions. You have 2 all-pro cornerbacks. This is your defense, right? And there's 4.5 minutes left, and you give the ball to Patrick Mahomes, and you're like, I don't think we're going to get the ball back. And that is the level of fear that I think Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni need to instill in the other teams, because that changes the way the other team thinks. Just knowing that there's 5 minutes left, we're down 7, we need to make something happen here. We need to be aggressive. We need to maybe push the envelope, certain things, because they know they might not get the ball back. And I loved that stat when I saw it this morning. It was pretty badass, and just an unreal kind of drive there. So the Eagles end up winning, like I said, 25-11, moving their record to 3-0. And sitting atop the NFC East. So we'll see what happens there. Obviously, the Commanders next week at home, one of their only 1 p.m. games, one of their 3 or 4 1 p.m. games of the year. They'll face the Commanders next week at home. So let's move around the NFL as we wrap up the pod. We'll just talk about a few big storylines that kind of happened this week. Number one, is there any other number one to have than the Miami Dolphins? They look absolutely ridiculous. They scored 70 points. 70 points. That is the 3rd most in NFL history. And they were 2 points away. They could have kicked a field goal to score the most points in a single game in NFL history. In one game. And it's just they absolutely dominated. They ran the ball as good as any team. I just want to pull some stats up, because when a team scores 70 points, you got to go to the box score. It's just unbelievable. Tua had a great game. 23 of 26, 309 yards, 4 touchdowns. But he wasn't even the story. Devon Achane, rookie running back, 18 carries, 203 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Oh yeah. And Devon Achane had 4 catches for 30 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. Rookie Devon Achane had 230 total yards and 4 touchdowns. So you got to think, yeah, that's the best running back performance in the backfield. Not to be outdone, Raheem Mostert, 13 carries, 82 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground, also 7 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown through the air. So Raheem Mostert, 140 yards and 4 touchdowns to go along with Devon Achane's 230 yards and 4 touchdowns. So you think, all right, the running backs just did their thing. No, Tyreek Hill, 9 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown. This team went absolutely ballistic. That was one of the greatest performances I've ever seen out of any team. It was the greatest performance I've seen offensively from a team ever. Putting up that kind of points. You thought that the Broncos had a really, really good defense. They had one last year, but I don't know why it hasn't translated this year, and they just absolutely dominated. You have to paint them as the favorite in the AFC. I mean, I guess you could say that the Chiefs are still the favorite because they won last year, and they're still 2-1. It's not like they're doing bad at all. but Miami just looks so potent, like incredibly potent. And maybe it's just a prisoner of the moment. They just scored 70 points, but I think you can pretty much mark down Miami and Kansas City in the AFC Championship game in January, because that is the game that I want to see. Unfortunately for the Eagles, we have to go through Miami and Kansas City in the span of a few weeks, so it's really going to test where they're at. But I had to talk about Miami. I think every week I've come on here the last 3 weeks and said how much I love Miami. Two of the things in my preview show, I had them third in the AFC East. I just want to make that abundantly clear. I had them third. And two of my concerns with the team was, number one, Tua's health. He's been fine. Number two, run game. I wasn't sure how they were going to run the ball. Check. They're doing pretty well there. And then the defensive injuries. The defensive injuries for them haven't been too bad. Jalen Ramsey is hurt right now, but will be coming back. And they look pretty solid so far. I mean, they held Denver to 20, New England to 17, I believe, last week. They're doing really, really well defensively as well. So, they're just an absolute wrecking ball, and be scary, to be an AFC's team and see Miami come in there. Another major storyline, obviously, we got to keep track of here is the Cardinals absolutely dominating the Cowboys in the desert. The Cardinals were projected to be probably the worst team in the NFL this year, and not only have they not been that, but they've also they should be maybe 2-1. They should maybe even be 3-0. I mean, they go week 1, they're leading Washington on the road, and they end up giving up 10 points in the fourth quarter and losing to the Commanders. Then they go up 21-0 on the Giants, end up losing that game 31-28 at home. And then this game, they get out early on the Cowboys and one of the best defenses in NFL history, I'm told, and just absolutely embarrass them. I mean, they led this game start to finish, and it wasn't close. I mean, it kind of got close a little bit toward the end, and then Dak threw an interception, and that was it. That was the end of the game. So the Cardinals, and Jonathan Gannon have been performing admirably. They have 2 picks early. They're going to have Houston's pick and their own pick, so they should have 2 top 10 picks. We'll see where it ends up, but they should theoretically have the 2 top 10 picks. And it's just been crazy, man. It's just been absolutely crazy. They end up beating the Cowboys. Cowboys fall to 2-1 with the Commanders for second in the NFC East. I'm not going to say I said that hot take, but, we'll see what the Commanders end up keeping up with. So the Cardinals, maybe they're better than we thought, and maybe they'll keep it up a little bit. As we move to the AFC a little bit, we're going to bounce back and forth for the last couple points, but there's slight concern with Jacksonville. After a loss to Houston, Houston went into Jacksonville and dominated them absolutely from start to finish. It was 17-0 at halftime. It ended up being 37-17. They just absolutely dominated. And CJ Stroud, man. CJ Stroud looks really, really good. 20 of 30 for 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Gets all his wide receivers involved. The run game was pretty solid. He even got out 3 carries for 14 yards. He throws the ball deep. He throws it the intermediate routes. Like, CJ Stroud is impressive, man. And it wasn't really, it kind of flew under the radar with, Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson and, these guys. But he's shown up and showed out for Houston. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how they kind of move. I mean, they're 1-2. So, the record-wise, they're not phenomenal, but, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they move throughout the rest of the season and how CJ Stroud develops. They host the Steelers next week, so we'll see. That's going to be a good matchup. Not an offense that scares you, but definitely a defense that scares you, so we'll see how CJ Stroud deals with TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick and the boys. So that's going to be really interesting, but I did want to mention CJ Stroud and how, impressive he has looked. Let's talk about a team that hasn't looked impressive, the Chicago Bears. Like, what do you do if you're the Bears? I mean, first of all, Justin Fields honestly looks like he's regressed from the end of last season. Was a popular player to break out this year. He's my quarterback on a number of my fantasy teams. but he's just struggled. The offense in general has just been terrible. The defense has been terrible. They just got absolutely shellacked in Kansas City by the Chiefs, which is nothing to, hang your head about, but still, like, they got absolutely embarrassed after, a week where Justin Fields is like blaming the coaching for how bad he's playing and all this stuff. Like, it is a dumpster fire. Good news for the Bears is they have their own pick, and they also have Carolina's pick in this draft coming up. So they should realistically have 2 top 10 picks. They're both 0-3, so 2 top 5 picks maybe. So you're talking about if Justin Fields isn't the guy, do you take Caleb Williams if you have the number 1 pick? I would. If you have the number 2 pick, do you take Drake May and replace Justin Fields? That's a little bit more of a question, but Marvin Harrison Jr., he's going to be there. That could be an elite playmaker for Justin Fields or whoever the quarterback is. There's a lot to weigh. There's a lot on the table to weigh here, and I think I still have faith in Justin Fields. I think he isn't a perfect quarterback. I don't think he is. Everyone thought he was going to be Jalen Hurts. I don't think he's that mold. I don't think he can throw the ball quite like Jalen Hurts can. But at the same time, I think there's a lot to do with the coaching as well. I believe he only had like 2 designed quarterback runs in the first 2 weeks after rushing for 1,100 yards last year. I know you don't want him to run that much, but at the same time, that's when the team started to be able to move the ball, when you had that threat of the Justin Fields run. And maybe defensive has just stymied it. Maybe they just figured out their tells and when they're going to run with the quarterback. But he needs to get quicker feet in the pocket. He needs to read defenses better. The coaching staff needs to put him in better positions to succeed. It's just a total dumpster fire right now. And already the view has gone to next year and what the Bears can do to improve their situation as they go into the 2024 season. So it's going to be really, really interesting. They have the Broncos, who just got 70 hung on their head at home this week coming up. So if they can't do anything in this game, the Broncos just got absolutely embarrassed. So I think they're going to have an energized outlook for this game. The Bears got embarrassed too, so we'll see which coaching staff is better. I tend to lean on the Sean Payton side of that coaching staff, but at the same time, we'll see kind of who can react and respond after both teams just got absolutely embarrassed in week 3. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for the show today. Once again, check the description below for all our social media handles. Feel free to shoot us any questions, and we'll answer them on the show. Thanks, you guys, for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again next time.